morning and welcome to day 3 of Real Estate Live UK. This is our first week of events for 2021 and we'll be back in June and October this year. The programme, brought to you by White Label and our partners, offers Places a platform for promotion and seeks to keep the property and regeneration sectors updated and engaged. And this week we've been doing just that. You can view more details about the events taking place on our website, realestatelive.co.uk, and I'll let you know about what else is coming up today at the end of this session. Now, before we begin, we'll be launching a poll asking what will be the most significant trend for regeneration professionals in 2021. A few options will now be appearing on your screen, so please take your time to read through those and submit your answers. And while you're doing that, I'm delighted to introduce our opening keynote for today on green investment and the drive to new energy, a topic that has been at the forefront of many of the conversations this week and I'm sure will only rise in importance over 2021. We'd like to maintain the interactivity levels during this panel, so please do submit questions to the speakers throughout the session using the Q&A feature. And to moderate those questions and host the session, I'd now like to hand over to John Whiteaker, Senior Editor at Investment Monitor, who will be chairing this debate. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Bonnie. Good morning and welcome to everyone watching. As Bonnie said, my name is John Whiteaker. I'm the Senior Editor of Investment Monitor, and I'm delighted to be chairing this session on green investment and the drive to new energy as part of Real Estate Live. My esteemed panel have been tasked with discussing and debating how the public and private sectors can work together to meet the UK government's net zero and green industrial revolution aspirations. Huge amounts of investment will be needed over the next couple of decades if carbon reduction targets are to be met, and the UK will be competing with countries around the world to become a leader in emerging technologies and sectors. How can we ensure these ambitions are met? Well, that's what I'm going to be asking our panel, a knowledgeable bunch with experience to share on innovative projects across a range of technologies. I'm now going to be introducing each of them in turn, allowing them to explain a little about their experience with green investments. And first of all, I'm going to turn to Andrew Nguyen, who is the Programmes and Project Manager at Aberdeen City Council. Good morning, Andrew.
Morning, John. So, morning, everybody. As John's introduced me, I'm Andrew Nguyen. I'm Programs Manager at Aberdeen City Council, and over the last 5 to 6 years, I've been working in different private and public sector partnerships around delivering strategic investments in Aberdeen City, particularly focusing at the moment around energy transition and the opportunities for the industry in the region.
Great. Andrew, can you give us a little bit of a taste of some of the initiatives that Aberdeen has been doing to try and drive green investment? And why do you think the city is kind of well placed to support the energy transition?
No problem, John. I can do that. As everyone knows, Aberdeen is kind of well known for being the centre of oil and gas activity in the North Sea and globally through the UK. So we have obviously home to over 50% of the UK's energy companies and a sector that supports over 36,000 jobs across the whole UK. So the energy industry is obviously fundamental to our region. But obviously climate change and the need towards energy transition is a fundamental reason, not only from an environmental point of view, but for a region, also from the economy point of view, because of that, just the amount of support we provide around jobs and that in the region and further afield. So Aberdeen is fortunate in its own right to have a lot of natural assets to support future green investment. So our location to the North Sea has obviously been ideal for offshore wind development opportunities, and obviously our highly skilled workforce, who obviously have been working in the energy sector for the last 40 years, are really put Aberdeen in the best position to be a world leader in innovation and commercialisation of green jobs and green activities. So we have set a clear ambition for the region to be net zero by 2045, in line with Scottish Government targets and also UK Government targets. And obviously we are looking at ways of working with the private sector to facilitate a real rapid change and pace towards net zero and the need to meet the climate change challenges. So we've put in place a number of different plans and vision documents, but also our strategic infrastructure plan, which is focusing on investments in the region towards green investment. And these are around about a £10 billion pipeline up until 2030. of different private and public sector investments in green economy activities. So this builds on current investments that we're doing in the region. So we have around about nearly £2 billion of investment currently underway or currently being built in Aberdeen. We've got a new £350 million harbour, which is currently being built to the south of Aberdeen, which will be a 24/7 deep water harbour, to obviously designed to facilitate offshore berthing and offshore wind opportunities in the future. We've been in partnership with other private sector partners, including Vattenfall, for a European Offshore Wind Development Centre, which is now up and running off Aberdeen Bay. And we're in the process at the moment of taking through an energy transition zone, which is associated with Aberdeen Harbour, and that's designed to support the emerging offshore wind sector, but also any potential CCUS, carbon capture and storage, and also potentially hydrogen reduction opportunities for the region. So our focus is around energy. It is what we do in Aberdeen. And so we are now trying to put in place a pipeline of projects and investments to allow the private sector to come into Aberdeen and obviously diversify the energy sector for ourselves moving forward. So that's our plans at the moment, John.
Sounds good. Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm going to turn next to Daniel Ruiz, who is the CEO of automated mobility company Zenzik, and also a board member of local enterprise partnership Enterprise M3. Hi, Daniel.
Hello, John.
Could you tell us a little bit about Enterprise M3 and its ambitions for the low carbon economy?
Yes, so I'm definitely here with my Enterprise M3 hat on. Enterprise M3 is one of the UK's most successful local enterprise partnerships, the LEPs. It has about 10% of the entire UK low carbon and environmental goods and services sector companies in it. So that's over 7,000 companies in the area, which sits astride the M3, hence the name, and covers large parts of Surrey and Hampshire. Those 7,000 companies are generating more than £18 billion of sales per year, which so it's a very major part of the UK's green economy. The fields that we're particularly strong in are alternative fuels, modern methods of low carbon construction, alternative fuel vehicles, wind and geothermal. So there's a lot there that complements what Andrew's just been talking about, and they represent about 64% of the total activity in the Enterprise M3 region. But I would stress that the LEPs in the UK are increasingly joined up. We do a lot of work with the adjacent LEPs on our strategies and how we can work together to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. Collaboration is probably a word that I will use a few times this morning. But more specifically, you asked about the Enterprise M3 LEP. We've put out recently a recovery plan, economic recovery plan called Revive and Renew. It focuses a lot on the low carbon economy, and those elements that are specific to the low carbon economy include prioritising decarbonisation of transport and buildings, whether that's homes, commercial or industrial. The supporting the development of marketable low carbon innovations. Again, the word innovation will keep coming up. And for me, innovation is about doing better with what you've got, not reinventing wheels necessarily. So low carbon innovation, which can future-proof and sustain vulnerable sectors, especially and industries like aviation, which is big in our region. And the third of those priorities for our Revive and Renew plan is to make every funding decision a clean growth decision and embed that in policy.
Great. That's quite a significant commitment to say that every funding decision is going to be a green one. I guess reflects how far thinking around planning has changed so much in just a few years. Next, I want to bring in Martin Bellamy into the conversation. He's the CEO of Gravity, which is an innovative campus and enterprise zone in the southwest of the country. So, hello, Martin.
Morning, John. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me onto the panel this morning. I'm wearing a couple of hats, really. One as chairman of the merchant banking business, Salamanca Group, and also as the chairman of Gravity, as you mentioned, which is a 650-acre site next to junction 23 of the M5. But also my other hat is as co-founder of the Clean Growth Leadership Network. And in terms of just sort of tying those things together, our ambition with Gravity is to create an exemplar clean growth innovation campus in the UK, and to really try and drive businesses towards Gravity, highly skilled manufacturing and innovation with a very strong emphasis on clean growth and the clean agenda, which is easier said than done. But I think that Gravity is a marvelous opportunity to show what the UK can do. Interestingly enough, we've also submitted a bid to government as part of Bristol Port to become a free port and a free zone, which I think will also make Gravity more attractive. But I think interestingly enough, when our group acquired the site off BAE Systems back in 2017, we took a very conscious decision that the key thesis behind Gravity would be clean growth. And even as recently as 2017, that was, I think, seen as quite a risky strategy. And we were concerned that we would perhaps put some companies off coming to a campus that was really promoting clean growth as something that was front and center. And of course, as we all know, the pace of change over the last 3 years has been absolutely dramatic. And I think it clearly during the pandemic, I think it's gathered even more pace. But I would put it to you like this, that if we didn't have a focus at Gravity on the clean growth agenda and the race to net zero, then we would be very unattractive to potential occupants. And we're targeting, as you would expect, areas such as EV, battery production, data, AI, robotics, advanced manufacturing. But I think the point which some of my colleagues have already made is that I think the key to achieving the transition to a clean economy has to focus on innovation. And I think the interesting thing is that, certainly in my opinion, the revolution that we are going through, the clean growth revolution, will create more opportunity, more jobs than I think we could ever imagine. And so I think that whilst it's a daunting task, it's also a very, very exciting opportunity, and also a very challenging opportunity. And so, one of the things that we're trying to do with Gravity is to appeal to all of those entrepreneurs out there and the fantastic innovators that we have in the UK. We're a nation of innovators, to come forward and to play their part in the transition to the new economy. So that's just a bit of summary, John, in terms of what we're up to.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Martin. Next, I'm going to bring in Edward Reed, who's Head of Advisory at Consultancy WSP. Edward, I'd like to hear about your work with your clients at the moment about driving the green agenda forward, and how your work is interacting with those efforts to support the UK's shift to new energy.
Morning, John. Morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, John. So in terms of the green investment and the shift towards that, I think we're seeing that in so many of our projects, commissions and conversations that we're having with our clients. I think there's probably a couple of areas that I'd like to specifically highlight, and then probably pick up on the point that Daniel was making around sort of what we're seeing our clients doing around making good use of existing assets, because there's quite a common theme there, and we're certainly having some very good interaction with our clients on that subject. So look, we're playing quite a big role in the UK's transition to net zero by 2050. We're working extensively in the renewable energy sector, everything including solar power, fuel cell technology, and really interesting the hydrogen supply chain, which is becoming an increasingly sort of common topic, I think, for WSP and for many consultancy firms as well. So we developed over the last couple of years very significant hydrogen capability. We're working on the HyNet project in the northwest. That's a major piece of new critical infrastructure in terms of the government and the region reaching its targets. So that's really exciting. In terms of the point about reusing some of the existing assets that we've got, we're working currently with Southampton Water's decarbonisation strategy, and we've certainly been working very recently, picking up on Martin's point around Freeport, with one of the major port operators looking as part of their Freeport bid on a clean energy hub, which is really exciting piece of work. Further down the supply chain, we've been working on some very innovative battery technology project in Sweden, a business called Northvolt, which has been written around quite a lot in the press, and that's been really interesting to see the speed at which a project of that type can progress in the right environment, and I think we'll probably pick up on that, John, later, about how you create that right environment. Back closer to home, we've been working on a new fuel cell electrode facility down in Swindon. Really exciting, cutting edge, challenging projects, but I think they're all part of the move that we're seeing towards this much greener economy. And I think the output from that is, they're creating lots of exciting jobs, which is really good.
Yeah, great. Okay, last but certainly not least, I'm going to turn to Graham Smith, consultant for green finance at advisory firm Arup. Graham, good morning. I'm keen to hear from you about how you are working with your clients at the moment, and particularly how you're getting the message across about the importance of kind of building green into their projects, and what opportunities that opens up to kind of the growing sector of green finance that's out there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess probably the most important thing for me at Arup is the fact that my background has been in banking. So I headed the sustainable finance unit at HSBC for 3 years before joining Arup, and my role really is to guide clients through the maze of bank requirements to reach that holy grail of green finance in the middle, green and sustainable finance, so ESG finance as well. But the issue is nowadays is this is what banks want to do. A lot of the UK banks have got to achieve net zero carbon impact by 2050. They want green assets. They want to do green loans. They will price them differently, but clients need to come up with the information that the banks need to meet those requirements. There's certain principles, the green loan principles. I was one of the bankers that helped write them. And really what we're seeing is that every client should be able to reach green finance. It's very difficult to do a project nowadays that uses more water, uses more electricity, emits more than it would have done before. So it should be within reach. The issues are to understand what you need to do. And real estate, just to give one example, is very well placed, both in terms of refurbishment and new buildings, to access green finance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the message that's coming across from all the participants on the panel is how much these issues and concerns around investment have accelerated in recent years, and now kind of central to developers and, as Graham was saying, lenders and other investors. They're the central priorities now for them. And obviously that's a very positive move in terms of trying to meet the targets that have been set in terms of carbon reduction and so forth. how much can we give credit to central government with its policies around free ports, or its aspirations for a green industrial revolution, or its targets for net zero? I mean, how much has that been responsible for this acceleration that everyone is kind of reporting, or are they kind of following the crowd because this is what's happening in the wider market anyway? And thought maybe I could throw that over to Martin to start off with. How much credit does central government get for this change in market conditions?
Well, I mean, I personally think where a lot of credit has to go to in terms of the progress that we are making is actually to the younger generations, because I think the point about the transition to a clean economy is that it's all of our responsibility to drive that forward, and principally to protect the planet, but also to protect it for generations to come. And I think that the younger generation have a really key role to play here, because they are often the innovators of today, but definitely the innovators of tomorrow. And I think that a lot of young people are very vocal about this, and that's really taken hold. But I also think the private sector has also played an interesting role. I mean, I'm sure that Graham would have taken note of BlackRock's policy change and Larry Fink's open letter about BlackRock's change in investment principles. And I think we're seeing that across the board. I was talking to Marsh McLennan the other day, and their view is that there are some clients that they will probably not be able to work with because they won't fall into line with how Marsh looks at the world from a clean growth perspective. But going back to your original point, I mean, I think that at long last governments are on board, and I think the British government is on board. I think they were probably a bit slow to get on board. But I think that, and you also see it in the Biden administration, actually in America as well. I think people are at long last seeing that this is not something to be afraid. Well, the thing to be afraid of is that we don't address it. But in addressing it, I think people are starting to realize that it will create huge opportunity for everybody, and it will create opportunity for the young people to innovate and to play their part.
Yeah. Absolutely. I wonder if I could get Angie's perspective. Obviously, from a city's point of view, you have your own agendas and you're setting your own visions. But how much do you feel that you're led by central government decisions, or how much support would you like to see? Like Martin, do you think that maybe the central government hasn't moved as quickly as it probably should have done, and has not followed the market and aspirations? What are your thoughts around this?
So I suppose the thing that builds on Martin's point about is particularly when obviously America was looking before the previous administration, particularly around kind of net zero and climate change, about where cities actually took up the mantle to deliver against net zero. I think all cities and regions everywhere in the world have the same challenges from a net zero point of view. It's around transport, it's mobility, it's buildings and energy. So there is a drive from cities to look at the ways of looking at net zero in a proactive way from an environmental point of view, but from an economy point of view. And that's mostly more so for Aberdeen. I mean, that's what our economy is based on, an oil and gas fossil fuel basis. So our need to diversify is more important, and industry in Aberdeen has actually picked that up. So we're getting a massive drive from energy companies such as BP and Shell towards clean growth opportunities. And that's kind of driving government, and government is also recognising the importance to the UK and the Scottish economy around of clean growth. So we're seeing a lot of movement within the industry, particularly in Aberdeen, around energy transition, and you're seeing announcements around North Sea transition deals and all those kind of things. But then you're also seeing announcements such as like Aberdeen City Region Deal and other city region deals elsewhere in the country around clean growth. So We're seeing diversification in our city region deal, which was funded by the UK government and Scottish government around technology and innovation, particularly around the oil and gas sector to support renewables in terms of moving to net zero. And then you're also seeing government now identifying strategic investments through the UK 10-point plan, through the Scottish government's transition fund, but also Scottish government's wider program for government, which sits around £2.6 billion towards net zero activities for the whole of Scotland. And that is around looking at the economic opportunities that clean growth and net zero provides for the Scotland and also for the wider UK economy.
Sure. Daniel, I wonder if I could bring you in here as well, looking at that kind of local perspective. Obviously, Angie's talking about the importance that cities, the important role that they have to play in driving this. And do you recognise that what the others have been talking about businesses really driving a lot of the change that we're seeing at the moment?
Absolutely. In fact, I was just going to say that I think one of the reasons why things are now starting to pick up and it's being talked about more is because there's a coming together of agendas. And central government did some driving in the early days. For example, in the case of the Office of Low Emission Vehicles, which was established almost a decade ago, it's now the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles. Vehicles are part of transport, but that drive from government won't do anything unless industry, society in general, picks up the baton, if you want. And the baton quite often manifests itself in terms of a business case. So the case of transport, the Transport for South East strategy, which came out last year, is seeing that there is the potential for massive growth over the next 30 years, the tune of growth from 183 billion, I think, to about 500 billion per year, which will create another 500,000 jobs. And we're all selfish, so I'm a bit cynical. But those goals are incentives in themselves to do things right. But it does come back to what I was saying before, that the Transport for the South East has picked up the mantle, the Enterprise M3 LEP and businesses have picked up the mantle, government is pushing it, and there is a need for all of the regions to pick up and the cities within the regions to work together to do this. And I think that the phrase the whole is greater than the sum of the parts keeps coming up as well. The aggregate of investment and kind of focus on clean growth is coming now, I think. And it's one of the few positives to come out of the current hiatus, the pandemic, I think, is refocusing minds, and that's all helpful. Other things that are helping to focus minds are the COP26 at the end of the year. It's looming very, very large, and the UK has an opportunity to look good. The regions within the UK have an opportunity to look good if we grab that opportunity and make sure we're moving towards that imminent date as rapidly as possible. So I think that in terms of Enterprise M3, we're doing our bit. I cited some of those examples of the priorities we've got around decarbonisation, low carbon innovations, and having everything as a green funding decision. Like others, we can demonstrate that we've done stuff. So I think over the last year, we invested 21 million in low carbon projects, some very simple ones around street lighting and fast charging. And that's a good example of two projects, the latter one in particular, of laying foundations for exponential expansion of the green economy. And I think, again, we've got to recognise that a lot of small steps are going to add together to create the momentum and make the impact that we're really looking for.
Great. Just to mention to anybody watching, if you have any questions that you want to throw to anybody on our panel, don't be shy. Feel free to add them in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on that. So if anything comes up, I'm happy to share it with the panel. I just wanted to turn to kind of large major projects and around kind of infrastructure issues. and maybe turn to Edward and Graham and get their perspectives on the government initiatives around that and how supportive they are. I know Edward was talking about the drive and for establishing a hydrogen supply chain and how much interest that's garnering at the moment. Do we think that the government is doing the right things to kind of allow these kind of mega projects to move forward? What are your thoughts there, Edward?
Yes, I think the level of government support and encouragement is very positive and helpful. I think when we look further afield, though, I think we've seen greater ambition in some other governments. And for example, a great example is some of the work that we've been doing recently in Sweden. We started work only 3 years ago, advising on what was going to be Europe's first, gigafactory to develop batteries for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
That has gone from nothing to will be producing batteries by the end of this year. It's a massive investment, massive amount of support locally from government, local government, regional government. I only remember 3 years ago, on the 10 o'clock news, these ambitions were talked about for the UK, and they're not there yet. So the level of support is good, but it needs to be more, and it needs to be really focused and probably could get to an end result a lot quicker. And there's some great examples of some really small, modest-sized projects, but some of those projects which are going to create the next volume of good, high-tech, skilled, well-paid jobs, we need to put the pedal to the floor on those projects to make them happen, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have a view on this, or maybe I could turn to Graham, particularly with his banking experience. But the government talks about, we're anticipating in the budget announcement that a new national infrastructure bank is going to be launched, and we're not quite sure of the details, but it seems that part of its role is going to be to try and foster these new technologies and provide kind of early stage capital to help kind of ramp up these type of things. I mean, Graham, is initiatives like that, is that the type of thing that you would like to see more of to try and help us build our gigafactories or hydrogen production facilities or whatever it may be that are going to create those jobs that Edward's talking about?
Yeah, I think we need to be cautious because we already had a green investment bank, which the government then sold out to Macquarie. I think it would be good. I think you need to always bear in mind that the role of any sort of government-sponsored bank is not to crowd out competition. So they'll always try to do things that the other commercial banks in the UK aren't doing or work alongside them. So it will be good, but it won't be a magic wand that will suddenly change everything. I think that the government has set a political roadmap, which is good, much better than we've seen before. But I think it's the interpretation, what does it mean for businesses? And I've sat alongside a lot of sort of large corporates and said, look, I see an announcement in the papers, no more petrol and diesel powered, vehicles on sale from 2030. But what does that mean in terms of the decisions I need to take, this year? So a lot of companies are saying, what's the view from 30,000 feet? Should I be making widgets still for diesel engines? Should I be making sunroofs because they work for every type of vehicle? Should I be trying to get into the Tesla supply chain? So a lot of businesses are sort of asking, how does that interpret down to my level? And who can I talk to? And they can talk to banks, they can talk to consultants, they can talk to local chambers of commerce and other and their accountants. But a lot of them are sort of saying, what does that mean for me? What about my next decision? And one of the things I think that may help, that may come out of the budget, is the UK may move towards a UK green taxonomy. So there's already an EU green taxonomy comes into effect in January next year, which defines what green business is. And if your business is in that taxonomy, then you can pick up green investment, you can pick up green financing, you can consider yourselves, label yourselves a green company. I think that might be one of the things that would be a practical step to sort of start opening up. Okay, great, I know that my business is in the right area. Or if I'm a very large corporate and 20% of my business is in one of those taxonomy areas, then I'm 20% green. And I think those are things that actually might make a real difference.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a question through that kind of touches on that issue from Stephen Hillier here. Asks, it feels as though there's some cynicism among the public that some of the green energy solutions may not be truly carbon neutral when the full manufacturing, installation, maintenance, etc., is taken into account, wind farms being a particular one. I suspect this isn't slowing up investment because of government commitment, but wondered if the panel had any thoughts. I guess that's touching on what you're saying, Graham. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts about that challenge. That is anything ever truly green at the moment, and what can be done to try and promote more trust, perhaps from the public. Daniel,
I think part of it is down to openness and transparency, and constructive challenge. There's always a danger when you come up with a policy or some form of ruling that it is not as expansive as it could be, or not as universally relevant. In fact, it's impossible to make something absolutely perfect for every single situation. So we have a duty to make sure that we are genuinely going for clean growth. And the logic for doing that is that, of course, clean is a bit like quality in the 1980s and 90s. It was seen as an administrative bugbear, but actually generated higher value and ultimately created efficiency and better returns. So I think quality, safety and green are all things that ultimately lead to far better products and services. So that's the reason for kind of making sure that we challenge any diktats. And to kind of explain a bit where I'm coming from, there is an example where the net zero agenda in automotive has driven for the removal of internal combustion engines by 2035, and the investment in electrification. Now that is not a bad thing, but really it should also be looking at what it's trying to strive for is reduction in tailpipe emissions and a wheel-to-well impact on the environment. And the outcome should be within that specification, not just the output, which is no internal combustion vehicles on the roads. That's where the challenge comes in, and it's an evolution of a very good policy direction. It is not panning that policy direction, it's just saying that now we need to kind of think beyond it.
Yeah. Sorry, Andrew, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just building on what Daniel's point was. I mean, from City's perspective, it's also what, your direct scope 1, scope 2 emissions are for a city. So obviously well-to-wheel and tailpipe emissions is kind of things that are measured in terms of cities around net zero. Obviously we are focusing on the best opportunities from a clean growth opportunity to reduce emissions, and that could be hydrogen or that could be battery. But the need to deal with your direct emissions is a big driver. So government policy that supports that's great. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is that obviously we're always going to have embedded carbon within the system. So it's how we make the best use of some of our industrial processes and what we do around carbon capture and storage and alike to kind of manage those processes as we go along will be an innovation and a commercial reality that we'll probably have to address as time goes on.
Yeah, Martin, this is the major challenge facing around industry and stuff is the presence of carbon in those processes is going to be a long-term challenge for all of these targets.
I tend to share the cynicism of the within the last question, but I think what's really interesting is if as I'm sure many people have, if you read the Absolute Zero report, which was commissioned for government, which actually I read just before the pandemic. It makes for quite alarming reading, actually, because if you read that report, it tells you all the things that we are going to need to either change or stop doing to have any chance of getting to a net zero target. And, the irony of it is that during the pandemic, we did stop doing a lot of those things that the net zero report said that we might have to. But I think the point is that and I think we all face the same challenge, is that a lot of the industries that we're talking about and activities we talk about, they will be emitting activities. And so, yes, we do have to look at technologies like carbon capture, but to the point that we made offline before we started the debate, and I'd be interested in Graham's view on this actually, but I do think we're eventually going to have to go down the route of saying, well, actually, how do we extract emissions from the atmosphere? And question. I mean, that's a huge task. It's going to require huge innovation. I think no one knows really how we're going to do it. But the question is, are we going to be in a position where companies account in different ways, as Graham alluded to, and potentially are they eventually going to need to contribute to these types of activity that says, we can never stop emitting, full stop. So we are going to have to look at technologies like carbon capture, and at the end of the day, someone's going to have to pay for that. And that may well end up being levied through some form of change in taxation for companies. But I'm sure Graham's probably got a view on that.
Well, I'm not sure if Graham's got a view on that or another question that's come through, and a kind of an adjacent issue, I think, which is battery technology is proceeding apace, and we move towards electrification of vehicles and so much more. Are we confident that there are necessary resources to manufacture batteries for the whole world? Obviously, there are well-publicized environmental and human rights issues with mining around the world as it is. There's lots of speculation about possible deep sea mining and the concerns, ecological concerns around that. Do we have enough resources to kind of drive a battery revolution across the world? And does that involve trade-offs in a way that maybe we've not really considered yet? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I'll volunteer a short thought, and that is that it just reinforces to me that you cannot come up with just one solution to a big problem. You don't need to attack it on a number of fronts, and this speaks increasingly to the fact that this is a complex world, and the way you deal with this is by making sure that you coordinate your efforts, which is why hubs like the LEPs, like Enterprise M3, hubs like the Catapult network of innovation centres across the UK, all of these tighten up the network of activity and make sure that we can coordinate what we're doing on a number of fronts. So in the case of vehicles and batteries, electrification won't necessarily solve your problem, and there is the kind of the resource issue. It certainly won't solve the challenge, the problem in a very, very timely manner. So what we need to think about is, well, how can we reduce, again, very specific example, tailpipe emissions are generated by vehicles and traffic and the swarm, not just by individual vehicles and the batteries that contain them. So we should be thinking as much in the short term about connectivity and managing the vehicle fleet as a whole as we are thinking about how individual vehicles can be made cleaner. And that will mean that the aggregated benefit will come to us sooner and will be greater.
John, I'd probably like to build on that a little bit. I also agree there's no one technological solution for mobility, and the work that we've been doing in Aberdeen, particularly around hydrogen and the use of hydrogen as an opportunity for transport, heating and wider industrial applications, kind of says we should be looking at the whole system benefits of potential different technologies, not just one in isolation. So hydrogen for Aberdeen provides opportunities for energy storage. It's also around decarbonisation of many vectors. And it needs to be seen alongside batteries because you need to use the right technology in the right places. But obviously we need to look at the wider opportunities to the economy, not just one stationary technology by itself, because UK is not a leading battery manufacturer at the moment. There's other parts of the world that are doing that, but we have obviously strengths around innovation, integration, systems approaches to things that we should be really focusing on as a UK sector.
Yeah, and that's another point that I wanted to touch on was the government talks a lot about a green industrial revolution. And I'm always curious about how industrial that is likely to be. You know, are we talking about huge numbers of manufacturing and production jobs being in the UK, or like we've seen in batteries, do we risk being left behind by other countries who innovate quicker than us, and so therefore, you know, the things are going to be manufactured and produced elsewhere, and we're going to end up importing a lot of the new technologies that are going to be driving the economy. And maybe a cynical view there, but I don't know if someone wants to respond to my cynicism.
I think you're partly right there, John. I think, you know, just going back to the previous question, whether it's batteries or whether it's hydrogen or any other technology for that matter, you know, the right answer is a good mix of all of these. You know, there's challenges in the supply chain of all of these new products, new technologies. You know, and it goes far further than, you know, the chemicals and the products needed that you need to mine to produce batteries. It goes to the people that make the equipment. You know, the professional skills there that know how to really make and engineer batteries that we need. You know, the issues are all across the supply chain in batteries. It's no different in the hydrogen space. You know, there's only a handful of leading manufacturers with, you know, constrained capacity, you know, limited resources in terms of, you know, engineers, people who know how to do these things. So I think that's across the whole supply chain. I think the whole supply chain, and going as far as some of the traditional building you know, materials of, you know, steel and things like that. You know, we've got to go on a journey of how we green all of these things up, and I think every little bit will make a difference. You know, we can't put all of our eggs into one basket. You know, that's just not going to get us to a good place, I don't think.
Yeah.
Can I come in there? I think there's another thing that the pandemic has revealed to us, that we need to manufacture more locally, and it seems obvious. You want to move stuff around the world as little as possible, but there's also a far more selfish UK-centric perspective, exemplified by the supply of masks. The fact that we produced practically no masks in the country at the beginning of the pandemic, and now way over half of our masks are produced in the UK by necessity. Two things there. One is that we can inject energy into an industry that doesn't really exist very rapidly, so that's great. We've got the agility, but two, we need to think about it not in isolation. It was great to read some news about the fact that there is now a company that is recycling masks and turning them back into plastics that can be used for other applications. So very, very green. But that's all about thinking about the adjacent industries and building on what we have. So in the case of the EM3, the Enterprise M3 region, we shouldn't just be thinking about batteries and energy and transport. We should be thinking about, well, for example, the space sector that is very strong in the southeast. How can we exploit that? And I was at a really interesting event organised by EM3 yesterday on satellite applications, not just to transport, but to agriculture, to environment, and a wide range of fields. And again, recognition that these things look different, but they've got so many common factors. And if we can bring them together and say that they are high value, of immense economic benefit, and yes, they have that green label, then we're not doing things always for the sake of greenness, but greenness is a fundamental kind of spin-off, if you want.
I think there's been a number of questions sort of floating around this idea of, are we actually causing negative impacts at the same time we're aiming for positive impacts? And I think that, you know, that they're valid questions. I think one of the solutions is going to be, there's much more interest around this introduction of do no significant harm criteria when people are looking at green projects. So that means you can put up a wind farm, but then you've got to answer questions about, does that impact, you know, on pollution, on the, you know, the local environment, on the marine environment, on biodiversity? What negative, negative impacts it cause in the supply chain? So the projects now need to be much more rounded, and they need to look at, okay, yes, this is good, but these elements might be bad, and then you balance them. The question that came out around cement and steel, you need cement, you need steel. This is what holds up buildings. The issue is that you can maybe move towards more electric arc furnaces, but you're still going to need coking coal. All these things have a balance, and I think the way to make sure the balance is going in the right direction is you use these do no significant harm criteria, and banks will increasingly be looking at those criteria when they're going to be providing finance. And I think that's the secret. You go deeper into the background of each project, of each investment, of each requested financing to actually work out, okay, what's the balance on this? Are we net positive? But one thing that's really fundamental, things need to be commercial. You can't get a green or sustainable impact from something that fails within a year. You get green sustainable impacts because things actually work. And I think that's going to be one of the key things. At the end of the day, we want to make a better, greener economy, but we also have to be willing to take the ideas that we've got, we turn them upside down, we shake them, and we see if something falls off. If something falls off, then we need to reconstruct it and go again.
Okay, conscious we're into the last 10 minutes, so I'm probably going to round on my final question for each of you with an eye on a question that came through, which is interesting around what incentives there can be for ordinary people or consumers so that they can help support businesses without penalising them. I don't know whether that be incorporated into any of your answers to the following question, which is just to finish off, what is the greatest obstacle to the UK shift to green energy, and what's the single thing that can be done to help overcome that? So I'm going to ask each of you in turn to answer that in your own way. So I'm going to start with Martin.
Okay. Well, I think I think it's obviously a very good question. I think from my perspective, the important thing is that when we talk about the transition to the clean economy, it's not just about energy. It's actually about everything that we touch and feel, because fundamentally that's what is going to have to be addressed, and therefore everybody has a part to play in that. I would like to think that because we have, as Graham said, we've got to really try everything and turn things upside down. For me, especially for the younger generations, I think that will create a lot of opportunity that doesn't exist today. And so, part of the answer to the question is that I think that the transition that we're going to go through will offer more opportunities than we currently have by quite a factor. And then I guess the sort of major corporates' behaviours will be affected by the way in which the public view them, shareholders view them. So I think everyone's got a part to play. But I would emphasise that I think that the route that we're going down is actually going to create a lot more opportunity than we have today. And I think that's how all of us as ordinary people can play our part and take advantage of this transition.
Graham, turning to you for final thoughts on that question around greatest obstacle facing the UK in these efforts, and what's the single best thing we can do to try and overcome it?
I think everyone, when they're talking about green versus brown, they still look at price. What's in it for me? So green energy needs to be ubiquitous, it needs to be available, it needs to be well priced. But I think that maybe the thing that will make a difference is actually going to be if it's actually within reach. Most people don't really think of energy. It comes into your business, comes into your home. You maybe use gas for heating, maybe oil. I think what's going to be really interesting is that if we do have this electric vehicle revolution, what we're going to need is actually to have a stronger backbone of distribution down the UK, following motorways, following A roads, so that actually you plug your electric car into a point, by the side of the road in a lay-by, and of course you're going to want that to be green energy. At the moment, there's no way you can do that. The UK has a tiny, tiny number of charge points compared to even the Swedens and Norways of this world. And I think that if all of a sudden that energy point is close to you're interested, at that point in time, there'll be a sea change. If I'm plugging something electric into an electric point, I want that electricity to be green. And I think you need to be surrounded by those sort of decisions and those contact points. That's going to really sort of drive the revolution.
Great. Edward, some final thoughts for you?
Yeah, I don't look. I don't see there to be, look, there's lots of obstacles. There's lots of relatively small obstacles that I think can be, can be overcome. I think you add those together and it's a big obstacle. I think we're at the point now where, we are sort of at almost the sort of, the starting point of this journey. I think it's quite exciting. I think there's nothing big in the way to stop the UK getting on with this. And, certainly my experience of many projects is, the financing is there, providing these projects are commercially viable. And that's no different to any other business. Every business has to be commercially viable. I think it's probably the only, probably one of the biggest obstacles, I think, is probably skills, and just seeing the skills progress and develop to be able to support those industries. And I've seen that in my clients where they've tried to develop new businesses very, very rapidly. Some in Europe, and obtaining the necessary skills, and some of these are highly specialist skills. It is extremely hard to do in a very short space of time, and requires people to, recruit globally to do that. And I think that's probably, one of the biggest challenges. And look, we'll be in a fight for the talent with other countries and with other, competitor organisations doing something similar but different just down the road. So I think probably the people is probably the biggest of those obstacles. But I don't see any of those obstacles being anything that should, stop us from doing what we should be doing.
Great. Andrew, what's the biggest challenge from your perspective?
I suppose the thing that's probably not an obstacle but is a challenge is around about the scale of ambition. So there is a real pace of and need to address kind of clean growth and opportunities around reducing emissions. So for me, the biggest obstacle around that is how we give certainty to investors around projects and what pipelines of projects we are backing as a country and as a region to take forward. And it just goes back to my previous point around how cities and public sector need to be involved in that, because it's around addressing that chicken and egg, making those commercial projects a reality, and how public sector need to address some of the immediate net zero requirements, which from a government point of view are putting and placing on cities earlier than the rest of the economy. So cities and regions are needing to drive to net zero a lot earlier. And so the commercial opportunities and the pipelines of projects that come beside that obviously need to be taken forward at pace. So taking the need from that challenge and looking at ways we can do it is going to be something we'd have to address quite soon. Okay, and some final thoughts from you, Dan. You've got a couple of minutes to give us a solution to maybe challenge.
I won't try and fill them. I'd say that the key words here are ambition and incentivizing. Ambition definitely comes from having big goals that clearly will make a difference. The Energy South to East strategy that Enterprise M3 has put together with two of its neighbouring LEPs and Siemens talks about securing investment towards an estimated £14.7 billion of commercially and technically viable products. Those viable products obviously are products that are going to feed into the economy. Delivering a reduction in emissions across electricity, heat and transport, which is equivalent to removing all 5 million cars in the southeast from the road. And a number of others, but the last one, which is highly relevant, is the securing of 75,000 jobs across the Tri-LEP area. So those ambitious goals, I think, are there, and they're clearly done through collaboration. The incentivization, I'd say, comes from the fact that my fuel consumption plummeted when I implemented a fleet management tool across my company 500 a couple of years back. My home energy consumption plummeted when I got my smart meter in. Gamification or gamifying is very viable. So you asked about individuals. Individuals can make a difference just by making sure that they are playing the game, and companies can help them play the game to mutual benefit.
Brilliant. Well, we're just about out of time. So thank you to all of our panelists. Stimulating discussion. I think we're all ready to get out there and play the game and hopefully help drive that investment into green investment. So without further ado, thank you to everyone watching, and I'll pass over to Bonnie.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much to our panel for taking part in a big topic and one of the most important themes that we'll be discussing this week. We were saying in our opening keynote on Monday that 2021 might be the most important year in UK history so far for driving green investment. So we're really pleased that sessions this week are highlighting the opportunities and challenges of that. And thank you for all of your contributions. Speaking of those, audience, we would be delighted to see you tuning into some of them. Later today, we've got some brilliant discussions taking place, and the details of those are now on your screen. I'll just run through them quickly. Ealing in London and Greystar have a session specifically on housing amongst the green topic, looking at sustainable homes. We have a discussion taking place about the limitations and potential of our educational buildings. A panel with business improvement districts around the world discussing the recovery of global cities, and another session that we'll be hearing from international speakers and developing on the innovation theme, beyond buildings, placemaking for innovation with the UK Innovation Corridor. So lots of different sessions coming up, and I hope you can tune into some or all of those if you've got a nice free day. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again during the week.